You know how you can be from a time, and maybe y'all are young and y'all don't know, but we're discussing '90s game. You know how you can be from a time and you remember it fondly, but you're not crazy enough to forget the BS. And then when new people discover something different in a different time, they over romanticize it. There's a new thing going on where people are acting like, oh my God, 90s gaming was the golden era. It was so much great. It was so much better. The 90s, early 2000s were so awesome. And I just don't, as from someone who was actually there, I don't remember that. I don't remember it being a scandalous or where there were no scandals and these game companies were so great back then. And, they say things like, oh, they cared about the customer experience. They weren't all about money. And I just feel like I should come here and put into context how that is complete bullshit. It wasn't a better time. These games, these consoles were not cheaper by any means. These consoles were still $300, and they weren't this funny money $300 in 2016. It was $300 in the 90s and the 80s. That's double. These cartridges were $60 a pop. So at today's standard, they're about $150 a pop. There was no expansion pack. There was none of that. You play until you get tired of it or till your mom figures out how to get the money to buy more. Now, you're trying to tell me that Mega Man, Star Fox is better than what we have now. You're freaking delusional. Well, these companies are scumbags and they just want our money. All companies from the beginning of time into the end will be scumbags and they will always want your money. That is literally what they legally have to do. A lot of these companies are publicly traded. They have to make profit. There isn't a choice. We're not stupid. Are they pieces of shit? Yes, absolutely. Name a company. Name companies on one hand that isn't a piece of shit. They come from schools that produce pieces of shit. They go into careers that positively reinforce piece of shit attitude and piece of shit activity. That is the world we freaking live in. You can't go back into the 90s and say, oh man, in the 90s, it was just so much better. I remember the scandals in the 90s. I remember you couldn't get certain consoles when they came out. I remember them running out and you couldn't get it nowhere. I remember, the Super NES came with two controllers and the Sega Genesis only came with one. You had to buy the other one separately. That was a scandal. That was a scandal. I remember cords breaking and being cheaply freaking made, and you having to go up there and pay $39.98 to get a new one. That was a lot of money back then. I remember asking for the new cord and my freaking parents scolding me for not taking care of my stuff. I remember controllers breaking. I remember all of those things. It wasn't this glorious time unless you were one of these people who family had unlimited residual income and you just had every freaking game in the world. You bought every game for Sega, and then you had the Super Nintendo. You bought every game for the Super Nintendo. You had an N64 that came out before anybody else. Somehow you got your hands on it because your father knew a guy in New York, and he got your hands on it, and you were the freaking man. I remember the Zelda cartridge costing $20, probably more. I remember deluxe packs. I remember all those things. I remember after that and wanting to know more about the game, having to go buy a freaking magazine at $7.99 It tell you all the freaking strategies, and that was the only way you're going to get your actual news about the game. I remember that too. It was a racket then, it's a racket now. The level of gaming that we have achieved today, it is light year. It's not, you cannot compare it. You cannot compare it. Even if you watched what I'm showing you now and clipped, it will look like it's on two different planets. And they'll say, oh, it was more variety. That's hogwash. You have the internet. You can play an emulator of any game system at any time. I'll tell you what we didn't have back then: unlimited access. The games that were out were the games that were out. And if you didn't like it, tough titty. If you lived in a piece of crap town that couldn't keep their supply up, you just didn't get the game. It was just that freaking simple. And once you beat the game, that was it. You had limited choices of what you can do. There was no expansion pack coming. It just, you played it again. And a lot of this, a lot of people don't remember that if your mom was a overachieving couple with her, let's say your dad was a freaking lawyer and your mom was a freaking doctor, and they only had one kid so they can handle their careers and everything like that, they can buy you all the games in the world. That's not going to get you brothers and sisters to play it with. They're not going to give you brothers and sisters to play it with. You would have to have friends that come over, and God help you if you were the nerdy kid that didn't have any friends, because there was no internet to load up to. You weren't connecting your Super NES to the internet, and you're taking your lonely, chubby, acne-filled face butt up there and finding online friends to play with and joining a little Discord and a clan and meeting your friends that way and growing up. That wasn't happening. Either you were charismatic enough to have friends to have sleepover, or you just sucked. You better hope mom and dad popped out another kid. And if they did and you had a little brother, he was a jerk to you. And if you had an older brother, he was even a bigger jerk to you. He'd never give you the freaking controller. People were, older brothers were notorious for not letting you get your turn. And little brothers were notorious to cry to mom if you beat them too bad. It was a freaking shit show. It wasn't this glorious, happy freaking time. You sat around, you grind the game, you feel fondly of that time for a few reasons. Most people look back at other times and they romanticize on them. But how quickly do you forget that sometimes cartridges just didn't want to work? They just didn't want to work. No matter what you did, they just weren't interested. You had to blow in it. You had to molest it. You had to spit in it. And then it'll play for a while. Or you'll just get the freezing frame of death with the nasty tone. That's the last tone that played was just stuck. So the whole screen would stop and you would just hear, "Nee." And man, there were no autosaves then. There were no autosaves then. If that happened to you, you're screwed. You will be starting from the beginning. You'll be starting from the beginning. I remember the freaking scandal of memory cards. That was a scandal. I gotta buy a freaking memory card? Memory cards were a scandal. Why doesn't the game just save it like regular? No. You had to go through the memory card situation. That was a super duper scandal. And then the freaking endless loading screens of the CD-ROM era. When PlayStation first freaking came out and had that disc and Dreamcast, those loading screens were abysmal. Not to mention that you didn't know how to take care of a CD-ROM. Your freaking cat's chewing on it on the freaking floor. You got gum stuck to it, old buffalo wing juice. That's it. You ruined your freaking game. You ruined your $75, $69, or $82 freaking game. And let me tell you, parents were not as nice as they are now. You ruin that game, you are screwed. Because parents love to say, I'm teaching you a lesson, because they can't afford to buy you a new one. Because people didn't throw money away at that time. Your dad didn't understand, unless you had a cool stepdad like me who played video games. But the average guy, your dad didn't understand that video game shit. Hey, dad, I want to get this game. He'll say, did I just buy you a game 2 months ago? Like it didn't take you 2 days to beat it. And you just had that stupid game. So you had to enter the bartering mafia system of borrowing games. So you had to let your homeboy hold the game. He never took care of your stuff like you took care of his stuff. Or they'd move away while he has your freaking game and you'll never get it freaking back. Or the double borrowing where he'll borrow it for so long and then borrow it out to somebody else. Then you have to go to school like the freaking mafia and run up to him like an old mafia scene. We did a business deal with you, and you screwed us on it, my Johnny. Now I have to bust your head. That's how serious this was. And oh my God, the GameStop scam, super duper crap mafia of GameStop. Of you paying $60 for a game and then you beating it and coming in, they try to give you $14.95 for the shit. And then turn around, you go back in there the next week, you see your cartridge up there for freaking $33. You had to go through that freaking crap. Not to mention, things aren't as simple as they were then. Back then, this is during the crack era. You had uncles who stole PlayStations, Nintendos, and Segas and freaking pawned them. Then your mom has to make a big stink about it to get it back. It was a serious deal. Not to mention that if you're with your buddies, you beat somebody too big, you could get beat up because they weren't on the internet. They were right in your freaking face. There was none of this, I beat you up and call you all type of terrible slurs and there's nothing you can do about it. If you beat your cousin Buck too bad and you laugh and he laugh, he'll go upside your head. It was real danger on it. It was real stuff on the line. Real stuff on the line. Back then, cheating was cheesing a move. The Street Fighter tournaments just turned into pillow brawls and angriness. Because if you get on there with your cousin that has no idea what's going on and he just rubs the buttons left and right and somehow he keeps getting Chung Li to do that kick move that you can't seem to get around at the time, he thought, oh, it's in the game, it's not cheating. That was our cheating scandals at the time. Keep getting Eddie getting Eddie and keep doing the swoop move, and everybody knows that's a cheat, dude. I forget the name of that game. Was it Tekken? I forget what was the name Eddie was on. The dude that did the island fighting style that he was doing splits and spinning. He was always on the freaking ground. It was so freaking annoying. I forget the name of that game. But yeah, that's what what we went through back then. There was no getting away from it. There was no getting around it. The game was what the game was. And while I say I remember these times fondly, do not get it twisted. At any time, if I want a new game, I can jump on my freaking computer or I can jump on my PlayStation and I can purchase this game. Let me tell you, it doesn't matter if it's rain, sleet, or snow. Back then, if your mom didn't feel like taking you up there with that bar mitzvah money to get you the new freaking Crash Bandicoot, you were beat. Yeah, there's no getting a Zelda cartridge at 2 o'clock in the morning and getting your mom, who's worked all day at the hospital because she's a nurse, is getting her up with her swollen ankles to jump in her Ford freaking Tempo and drive you up to the mall to spend all your freaking bar mitzvah money, which you said you were going to save, on a video game you're going to be tired of anyway. And if she didn't feel like taking you, she can hit you with the, oh, you play games too much. Why don't you read a book? Like she ever read a goddamn book in her life. That's what we dealt with back then. This was real stress. There was no way for us to get away from it. We didn't have a car. And the GameStop was too far to go on your bike unless you had to go with one of your freaking friends up there. And that would be much later when you get a little bit older in your freaking teens. And then if you did that, you run the freaking risk of not kissing a girl that summer, which was the biggest freaking thing you could possibly do at the time. Yeah, not having sex, a kiss. A kiss meant you were the man. Holding a girl's hand meant you were the man. Y'all having full-fledged families at 12. It's a totally different world now. You kids with the level of stimuli that you're used to, you wouldn't want to go back to that slow non-stereo surround sound, no HD 4.3 ratio. You're not going back to that. And the freaking 8-bit noises. You're not going back to that. You're used to a level of carnage, dismay, and unmoralness that could never match with these games. These games barely had blood. Oh, yeah, that was a scandal, too. Sega Genesis, Mortal Kombat had blood. That was a scandal. That was talk of the town, and you had blood. Oh my god! And the teenagers that were like 16 went for the Sega Genesis because it had a damn or a shit word in there, and it had blood splatter. That was the level of innocence that was going on back then. You have porn broadband on your telephone. What the heck is a Super Nintendo gonna do for you? And now I hear, oh my God, they're collector's items of a better time. You know why things is boring now? Is because we're spoiled, get everything we want, consumerist pieces of shit. So we like to look back at a different time, and now Super Nintendos are going to be going for $1,200 a freaking pop when they were bought for $30 for the past 20 years in a pawn shop. And now it's for some contrarian kid or 30-year-old or 25-year-old says, I play the retro stuff to sound freaking cool and super deep to his emo girlfriend. When the truth is, they can't compete on Call of Duty. They says it's too freaking negative, and they're whiny, liberal, woke freaking crybabies, which is crazy because Nintendo and Sega Genesis was the most unwoke production in the world. If you were fat, you were, oh my God, go back and see how women and fat people are depicted in these 1989 and 1995 games. So it blows my mind that you liberal dorks and dweebs are acting like this was the golden era. This was the era of extreme racism and misogyny. These games reflect that. They reflect that. There's no way you could be both. If you were a true psycho feminine lib, if you were a true one of those, you wouldn't touch no game before 2 years ago. You definitely wouldn't go back to 1999. You wouldn't go back to see how women were depicted in Donkey Kong, the helpless woman that had to be freaking saved with her blonde hair and blue freaking eyes. Absolutely no diversity in there. The roles were totally trad wife completely, and they were unapologetic about it. So I know you wouldn't like it. So it's not a better time under y'all rules. The games were the top of the technology at the time, and I can see how you like it. And the difference is between then and freaking now, games are way more competitive because we've seen people make $1 million playing them. Of course, they're going to get competitive. There was no money to really be made from playing a freaking game. If you played a game back then, you were a nerd piece of freaking shit that had no freaking values, and you never want to do anything with your life. And as they said, it rots your brain. That's what the true thought process to parents then. TV and video games rot your brain. Until kids start paying dad's houses off and buying dad's pickup trucks on that, oh, I bought my dad a house reaction freaking video. Until they start doing that, no one even wanted their kids to play the freaking game. They hoarded it over you like a kilo of cocaine every time you wanted to do something. Did you do your homework? Did you walk the dog? Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you take your little brother with you? If you play the game, you got to let your little brother play too. They were doing that shit over you, hoarding it over you like a freaking chimp. It was not a beautiful freaking time. You may have been a general beautiful childhood that you had, and you may enjoy it a little bit. But then again, no one can sit around and tell you you are a stank piece of shit, F word every 5 minutes, calling you the N word every 5 minutes on the video game back then. Of course, it feels like it was better. It was new to you. It was happy. Here's the truth. If you say, oh my God, gaming is just boring now, maybe it is time for you to pick a new freaking hobby. You ever think of that? How about going outside and being physical? How about putting the Pepsi down? You fat son of a bitch. That's just my view on it. And maybe I'm right and maybe I'm freaking wrong. But I'm here to say, don't romanticize the 90s. It was a freaking horror show. A freaking horror show. Look up what the minimum wage was back then. People were struggling to get these games. And when they got them, you had a little bit of time and it was over. Yeah, you played it over and over because you didn't know no freaking better. You don't like the new games because it is freaking popular to not like them. That's why when I speak on the things that Call of Duty did or didn't do, I like to be as fair as possible. I say what I think and I ask you to tell me if I'm wrong or not. But don't get it twisted. I'm not going to buy a Super Nintendo and cooking up some old 8-bit Mortal Kombat or 16-bit Mortal Kombat and going at it with the choppy sounds and the choppy movement. I'm not doing it. I like my 120 frames per second. I like my 4K gaming. I like the ability to buy a game at 2 o'clock in the morning in my drawers as I pickle it out of my ball hair. I enjoy it. And do I complain about it? Yes. It's my God given, spoiled American freaking right. And it's yours too, because you watch it like a fat, funky, worthless piece of shit. Have a good day, TB the Gamer.